Добрый день, меня зовут Дарья.
Good afternoon, my name is Darya. This is my colleague Anastasiya. We would like to tell you about cosmetic and linguistic testing that we use at the Kaspersky Lab and the path from manual to automatic testing. Here's the plan. We're going to be talking about the life cycle, what life cycle is, why localization is important, and the cosmetic testing, why this is important, and how we got to optimal testing. We are going to cover some errors, some mistakes in localization, how it covers the functions of an application. Kaspersky Lab has been at the market in the software security market for some time now. We have a lot of products for both corporate and enterprise clients and private individuals. We have regional offices and we are represented across the world. The Kaspersky Lab is increasing its product range. We have expedited our business processes, and now some products have to be updated much more often than before. For example, we have endpoint security and Kaspersky security. Before they were released once a year, now we release them twice or three times a year. We have products that are sometimes released from once every 3 weeks, and some products are even released 50 times a year, such as my Kaspersky. And Nastya is going to tell us a few words about how products are developed in our company. So everything starts with the collection of requirements. We process the requirements, so we compile the plan of all the stages that have to be accomplished, the time scales, the time frame, the costs, and so on. Then we create the technical terms of reference, specifications. At this point, people get familiar with the costs, with the times, with the deadlines. Then we create the graphical design of the program, of the software. We create a unique representation of this software at the design phase. It is a design phase that the interaction between the different departments, including the localization department, is initiated, because when we create the localization mock-up, it is important to remember that there are very long words in some languages, such as German, and they may not fit into the standard lengths of buttons of certain UI controls. And also we have to incorporate the general scope of some critical points that may manifest themselves later. Then the coders write the code, and then we start the process of localization. In other words, adapting the software to the culture of the target country or to the peculiarities of the target language. At this point, we conduct very thorough linguistic and cosmetic testing. Then we transfer the product to the next department downstream. After the complete testing of the product is ready for release, and the end user can download it from the website. As they start to use it, they find some potential errors.
Последний этап – это поддержка пользователя.
And at the final stage, we have user support, where we collect user feedbacks, and this feedbacks is fed back into the development process, is reflected in new releases, and this is a cyclical process. So what is localization? Let's discuss this a little bit more. Localization is the adaptation of software to account for local languages in the culture of the target country. Localization is not internationalization. Internationalization calls for the ability of the product to be localized later. So localization is an important process in the entire development lifecycle. If we don't start testing for linguistic and cosmetic bugs, testers and developers will have to do much more work later to adapt the product for high-risk languages such as Arabic, where the interface is where the writing is from right to left, or for languages such as German with very long words. And then my colleague is going to tell you a little bit more about how localization works in our company. Well, localization is a very complicated iterative process that brings together a lot of specialists and involves a lot of experts. First, we write the source text. The technical specialist collects requirements from developers, from marketing, from editors, and then, based on the existing rules and standards, writes the text. We use either Russian or English in the company. Then the text goes to the editor checks it, it goes to localization engineers. Then we use automation translation programs such as Trados. Then we use the services of an agency, and after quality checks, we do checks once again. We make builds, and then we send this to our testers. They make screenshots, we check them, and the screenshots are checked for linguistic consistency and accuracy, and cosmetic accuracy. All the bugs are fixed, then we send the screenshots for regression, and then we release the product, and when we fix whatever has not been fixed. It is important in localization at the beginning of the product creation to think about localization, because the further you go into internationalization and localization, the more expensive it gets to fix the bugs. For example, if you think about all the problems of internationalization and localization, the costs will be more or less reasonable, but if you start thinking about this test phase, development phase, the costs are higher. But if you try to fix the problems after the product release, you see that the costs are very, very high. You have to really spend a lot of money to fix some minor errors that could have been fixed at virtually no cost. We are represented in very many countries, and we create 40 localizations to different language and target country combinations. Here are some statistics for products. For some products require only 2 localizations, and some require up to 32. So you see that our linguistic and cosmetic tests are really essential. We want to present our product in the best possible light. Now, let me tell you about the process of transitioning from manual to automatic testing. From the outset, a localization specialist spent up to hundreds of working hours on linguistic checks. This had to change, and in 2012 we asked our testers to write a program, it's called auto screenshotting, that on top of running automatic tests, it made a screenshot of every single window. So this really allowed us to cut the costs involved in the checks and finding mistakes and fixing them. So we got reports, but we got it in an Excel format, but this was not very convenient. So in 2015, we developed the Screenshot Lab utility, which makes checking these screenshots very convenient. It supports various languages. It's very easy to filter out the duplicate screenshots. You can always report bugs, that is linked to TFS, and you can send bugs to developers with a click of a mouse. And you can also see some statistics for how many bugs have been fixed and how many bugs have not been fixed. In this table you can see that localization engineers have started to, and now spend 5 times less time on those checks, and our agency, our linguists and translators, in fact, now spend half as much time, so screenshotting really saves our time costs and helps us really process the data fast. Now let me tell us a little bit more. Let me tell you a little bit more about the Screenshot Lab. This is an extremely useful utility because it allows us to send not all the screenshots to the testers, but also the ones that have been changed. Here you see the UX of the program. It has a main window, and a small window, the bug that we record for a given screenshot. So you can send this bug to TFS for fixing, or you can fix it yourself. You can load the screenshots from the sources that are being checked. It is important to observe the correct paths because that's how the program finds the links between the old and new screenshots. Also here you can see that all the screenshots are assigned status, match or no match, and you can use either pixel-based matching or ID matching. The pink color means corresponds to what has changed. Also, you can do a metadata-based matching. When our beta testers do the checks, they can use XML formats with the source and with the target. These originals are loaded into the program. You see that the red highlights the changed text or different text, and the green is unchanged. We also have other utilities that simplify the testing process. For example, we have a visualizer of the screenshots. It's called a screenshot viewer.
Не запускается? Здесь.
It's not a picture, it's a video illustrating how the program works. Okay, you can just look at the picture. Well, it's pretty easy to understand. This is a special plugin that's related to the parcel translation system. You see the original, you see the source, you see the target, and you can hover your mouse over a particular line and you can see the screenshot. If you press on the screenshot, you see which functional part of the program the line is in. That's very convenient. That really saves us the time and the money costs, because the linguist does not just translate blindly. The translator knows exactly the context of each specific word and phrase. So you reduce the number of bugs, you reduce the time required, and you reduce the amount of money that this whole thing costs them. At the translation phase, we do lots of tests for the checking of our resources, and Nastya will tell us more about this. Work with translators, and translators are people, they can make mistakes, and in order to find those mistakes in the final translators, we do a range of texts. We use a macro, we have utilities, macros, utilities, and so on. Now we are going to rush you through these utilities. This is the QA Common Checks macro. This macro allows us to identify some of the most common mistakes that interpreters or translators can make. We also can see we can set the date beyond which the lines are considered as new. So we just click on this line, for example, we can see what problem is with this line. What's the problem with this line? Perhaps you can't see it because the picture is blurry. The translator removed the percent sign, percent character, because percent %s is used as a placeholder for some variables. So this is going to be a major problem because we're just going to be missing this variable. We also have a range of automatic tests. This test highlights the lines that either have no localization or some lines are broken. You see the interface. It's a web application, and it provides some useful statistics about the bugs identified. This auto test adds these bugs to a TFS automatically, even if hundreds of different bugs have been identified. All of them, after just 1 second, are added into the TFS. We don't have to spend hours on explaining the paths to these lines, and that's very convenient. Also, to check licenses and so on, we have a lot of checklists, and it would be very difficult to check everything manually. So the tester runs these checks based on these checklists. Mostly these checks are about some broken lines, lack of localization. Here you see the interface of this test. You enter the file that was checked, the total statistics, the summary statistics for how many tests were passed, how many tests were failed. For example, we found that in the copyright, the wrong sign was used over the wrong year, and that could be a reason for some legal problems. As I said before, we have a range of different products. Some of them work together. For example, Nasty's product is the administration center, and the product I'm working on connects to Nasty's product. We can send screenshots of the entire product to the linguists, because that would involve unnecessary costs. Based on our tests, we can collect different builds and localize them together. For example, you see 2 different localizations on one screenshot. Everything that is in yellow is in English, and that's the localization of Nasty's product, while my product is in the Kazakh language. We knew that this translation was not done, so we send not the entire screenshot to the linguist, but we just ask the linguist to check only specific lines. So that's faster, that's cheaper. We have a special utility that allows us to take the lines from utilities. We have 2 such utilities, hash ID, that Nastya will tell us in a second, and uverify. That's very useful. These things are useful because manually checking whether or not the term is right is very costly. But we can automate this, and we automate it, use the utilities, and we see what is not present and what is present in the resources, and then we match the terms against the terms in the glossary. And very recently, in order to simplify this task, our developers created the hash ID utility. What's this utility? You can create help files, you can also add additional information. So the technical writer creates tags, also provides an ID of the tag. So in the iterative translation of the line, we don't have to translate these texts again once more. We just automatically get the lines from the parcel database. And we can save on translation because these lines are not part of the quota. That's very great because before we had to do manual checks, and that's a lot of labor. We had to do this manually, and that was extremely inconvenient. So we use hash ID in all of our projects now. We also would like to remind you about the localization errors that affect the features of the program, because sometimes these bugs may make builds impossible. Of course, there are a great number of such errors, but we have identified 5 main types. First is the translation of functional lines through incorrect use of parsers and variable by poorly informed translators, violation of the rule to escape quotes, using the wrong miscoding, duplicating hotkeys, and text meaning inconsistencies.
Let's look at them in greater detail. The first one is quite clear. We shouldn't have this first point, because if a variable is changed, the program will not find it at all. A Turkish interpreter was not aware. You can see the English on top, the Turkish in the bottom, and the build fails as a result because the variable is not available to the program. Then wrong screening. In the first case, if we don't screen the brackets or the quote marks, you will see that part of the installer code, and if the brackets are not screened, then the installer will not be available. Very often we use wrong coding in our file. It's a great headache, because UTF-8 is a good one. If you don't use it, then you see what we have. We had Thailand language, which in another coding was not recognized. We beg our developers to use Unicode only. Then duplicating hotkeys. You can see 3 underlined U, which should invoke a function. So we have 3 functions invoked with the same hotkey, which is wrong. In the new localization, some of the terms changed slightly, insignificantly, but the Turkish interpreter didn't know that. In some strings, he changed the term. In other strings, he didn't. There was a conflict. One and the same component was called differently. When we wanted to install our plugin to our administration service, we had a dump because he failed to find one of the elements of the program. And these are the main errors. Let me tell, Nastya will tell us you about internationalization and give some hints. Internationalization is a process of development for the final product, which includes localization. We have 2 main principles here in Kaspersky Lab. We highlight localizable strings or strings to be localized and store them separately, and we use standard formats which are supported by the operating system. Date formats, currency formats, time formats, date formats. And we want to give you a number of hints that will help you build a multi-language product. As we said, we recommend you to use UTF-8 with BOM, because it's our experience that shows you that most localizations are shown correctly in this code page. With most of the languages it works. We separate the text and punctuation from code. Build two strings, one with capital letters, the other without capital letters, to avoid problems with capitalization. Commas in some languages, for example in French, you must have a space in front of the question mark. This is the rule of the French language. In Japanese and Chinese, instead of European dots and commas, they use their own analogs. Try to localize all links, because if a user presses the link and get English or Russian product, so a Vietnamese user wouldn't be able to read it. Despite the fact that you separate localizable strings, try also to have different folders for different languages, because in some languages you will have to use their own formats, their own code pages. If in your interface you have the same words, the same strings, don't create one string for several languages. Create several strings, one per language, so that the person refers to his localized folder. Also, formats of data, the formats of date, time, currencies, and calendars. Take them from the operating system. Use ID, and it helps us to find a string in a ready-made interface. If you have something like this, a localizer and a tester will not find the string. But if it's like settings and so on, it's much easier to find the string. In some languages, we have a lot of plural forms. In Arabic, it has 6 forms of plural. It may cause a lot of problems. Try to use third-party libraries to solve the problem. Don't glue the strings together, because it may cause some problems, because we cannot see how the string is translated, because it is concatenated. The average length of a word is different in different languages, so your fields must be able to accommodate longer words. It may cause a problem. So today we learned what localization is, why it is important, how we do the linguistic and cosmetic testing, what kind of localization errors affect the functionality of software, and gave some pieces of advice to localize and internationalize our software. Thank you very much. Question 1. What other programs did you use apart from your own? What software did you mean? We mentioned several ones. If it's about automatic translation program like Spas and Trados, we use them for translation. What other kinds of software did you mean? Then let's go on. Why did you test after the development and not in parallel? In fact, we do it in parallel. What we are talking about is localization. Localization starts closer to the end of the development cycle, when the code is almost ready. Then only we can start translation, and then we test the translation. Before, it is simply impossible. Should the localization engineer be an interpreter? No, because the localization engineer works with a lot of languages. The set of languages changes. One engineer works with 3 to 7 languages at the same time. Some of the languages can be quite exotic: Arabic, Chinese, Japanese, a number of European languages. It's impossible for a person to know all of them. But of course, some linguistic intuition should be available. It helps us in cosmetic testing. You can also find some errors in grammatical structure of the language. Sometimes it's done. What kind of typical problems are disclosed by automatic tests? I mentioned it: localization errors, translation of the variables which shouldn't be translated, wrong symbols. It often happens when the interpreter translates not to his native language. He can forget about their own punctuation marks. We have special checks for Japanese punctuation. These are the main problems. Automatic quality assurance of texts. I mean, typical problems of texts. What kind of problems in the texts do the tests find? So, how do you evaluate the work without the ready design? It depends on the team of developers, the team of testers. The testers start working later. We showed you the general process of development. Developers know what kind of tasks they will face later, how they are going to distribute resources stage by stage. They know that starting from the planning stage, the localizers start working at the design stage. They affect the graphical design stage, and testers also start working together with us. They start learning about the tasks after the design is ready. Tell us about the most funny cases of localization. You cannot imagine how many we have. We have a lot of funny and strange moments. Funny ones include the following ones. For example, machine translation. It's ridiculous because human translators are roaring with laughter because a machine never understands what it translates. It's a computer test and not a general purpose test. Oh, for example, instead of a table, it speaks about a table which is part of the furniture. Different words are used. In some languages we use not the best professionals. For example, Kazakh language, nice people, it's nice to work with them, but they are not IT professionals. they have a lot of their own opinions on how to use different terms. And sometimes we negotiate for weeks, change the term. No, we should not change the term. Oh, please change the term. It doesn't look good. And of course, there are some legal compliance cases. They want something else. We have a lot of such cases. Localization is one of the most funny projects in case of development. How do you evaluate labor cost or labor scope? When we build the technical requirements, we already evaluate the volume of work. So we have different specifications, and depending on the technical requirements, we distribute our resources on a stage-by-stage basis. Localization and testing take place after the design. Do you include testers and localizers at the design stage? Everything is done in parallel. It's not iterative cycle. The localizers are connected on a lesser scale than the developers, because he has to write some code which then later has to be localized. But sometimes we see problems because German words are very long and the fields are so small, the German word will not fit into it, so we come and take part early at the development stage. But in general, we work in parallel. If a tester of localization doesn't know the language, how can we find the error? We have the pre-publishing task, and within that task we send translated texts to the same translation agency, or more often to another translation agencies, so that one set of translators can evaluate the work of another set of translators, to have second opinion. And then after all cosmetic and linguistic tests, we then test the product as such. Do you use the scheme with development stages? If we have a simple plugin, if it requires very little time for development, then a localizer and automatic specialist works with it, skipping some stages. When we have huge utilities like screenshot labs, we have to take into account all stages, because these utilities will use across the entire Kaspersky. How long does it take you to test the screenshots? We do it at night. We put that screenshot with a certain localization in the queue. We come back to office in the morning and see about 2,000 screenshots localized. Did you discuss Prompt Translate server? Prompt supplies us with machine translation services. We have been working with them for some time. We try to improve their system. They help us a lot. But apart from them, we use other systems, and now we are actively expand our scope. We shall use other tools. Do your tests have enough time for testing? Because they write a lot of codes. They do have the time, because we have an iterative process, and at some stages testers are not loaded heavily, and at that time we ask them kindly to work at some products which facilitate our life. In which format do you store your locals? we store all localizations separately. We use file log with texts, which then from that file the data is loaded to the product. We work with developers file. There are some parsers which invoke texts, which take texts for translation right from the code. Thank you, thank you, thank you.